Welcome back, folks. In this video, I'm going to cover the 3 most common mistakes that we see transitioning retirees make. Now, as you can imagine, you go from this phase of life where you're working, you have a job, you have income, your family's still at home, and then you make this transition into this next phase of life we call retirement. Well, during that transitionary period, there is a lot of decisions that need to be made. And so in this video, I want to cover 3 decisions that we see people typically make incorrectly or don't think about. So let's start with number 1. Now, before I get into number 1, be sure to listen to the end because I'm going to talk about some of the things that will help you in avoiding these 3 common mistakes. So number 1, this is going to sound kind of silly, but you need to know what you're going to do with your time in this next phase of life. So mistake number 1, you don't have a plan for what you're going to do with your time. I can't tell you how many times we have watched people transition into retirement only to be extremely unfulfilled, and they look for every opportunity to actually go back to work because they just are not content. And folks, I'm telling you, this is not a money problem. This is a I don't know what to do with my time problem, lack of purpose problem. And so at the end of this video, I want to give you some of the framework that we help people to really start thinking about, what am I going to do with my time at this next phase of life? Because I think that's one of the worst places to be, is to be in this phase of life that could be so exciting and fun. And maybe there's things you've put off and you now want to do them. But if you haven't mapped all that out, you may find yourself in that same situation that we found a lot of people where they just actually want to go back to work because there's more purpose there. Mistake number 2, taking Social Security at age 62 without having a reason. Now, folks, I'm not here to tell you that you shouldn't take Social Security at age 62. However, what I am here to tell you is that you need to understand the moving pieces and what it means to you and maybe your spouse if you take Social Security at age 62. Now, it's really common that we'll have someone come in and they say, we took Social Security at age 62 because that was the soonest we could take it. And, it's probably not going to be there for our life anyway, so let's get as much as we can. The thing that they didn't realize is that by making that one decision, they now affected their spouse's benefits. They may have affected their survivor benefits. They may have affected the taxation of their Social Security, as well as some of the other unique rules around taking Social Security early. And so I'm going to give just a little bit of framework. We won't dig deep in this video on how to really analyze Social Security. I do want to give you some things to think about to help you avoid that mistake. Now, the third mistake that's common is not having a tax planning strategy in this phase of life. It's been pretty interesting when we have a first meeting with a new couple. One of the many questions that comes up is, tell me about your tax planning strategy. Folks, it's kind of like a deer in the headlight look. They have no idea. And so we might even say, well, tell us what maybe your advisor is just taking care of that for you and you don't know it. And it's pretty common for them to say, well, my advisor actually says that I just need to talk to my accountant. And folks, I'm not an accountant. We are financial advisors. I don't do taxes. But what I do is we help people map out a tax planning strategy at this phase of life. And it can be pretty dang significant if done properly. And so you need to kind of map out a handful of things when you get into that phase of life from a tax planning perspective. So folks, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get into something we call Retire Ready, which is a workbook that we created to help walk people through all the moving pieces of retirement. And you can just kind of go through it and you mark it up, and it just helps provide a framework, almost like a blueprint for helping you navigate this next phase of life with confidence. So let me just show you in our Retire Ready workbook some of the ways to consider avoiding the mistakes that we just talked about. So the very first chapter in this workbook is, what am I going to do with my time? So let's just look at that. Now, folks, there's nothing crazy here. This is simply saying, how do you envision spending your time in retirement? Are you traveling? Are you exercising? Are you with your family? Are you with your friends? Maybe there's something you want to learn. Maybe you love to garden. Maybe you want to volunteer more. What are your hobbies? Think about all of these things and just brainstorm. Take out a piece of paper and just write down all of these things that come to your mind. And one of the pro tips that we like to say is go back to the last 10 years of your life or whatever you can remember over the most recent history and ask yourself, when did you find the most joy in your basic living? And see if you can find a pattern that helps you determine, where am I finding the most purpose in my life? Because if you can get more of that, then this next phase of life could be amazing. So think about these things. Just here's a few just things to think about. Now, let's jump over to how do we accommodate this mistake in the Social Security realm. Now, this workbook's pretty comprehensive. So let me get down to Social Security. Now, in Social Security, there's a handful of things you need to be very aware of, but I think they all fall in kind of a similar category. So let's look at these 5. Claiming considerations: your retirement goals, your current health, your family health history. What available retirement assets do you have? Folks, the only way to make a really good Social Security decision is to coordinate it with the other retirement assets that you have. So you need to put all those pieces together. And then that last one right there is spousal or survivor benefits. Really, really important. And let me give you one idea. Imagine if you are the older spouse and you pass away and you had the largest Social Security amount. What happens for your surviving spouse? How much is the survivor benefit for her or him? Because that'll be really important, because what we tend to see a lot is that a couple makes this assumption that whatever income they have, maybe at the start of their retirement, which most of the time, right, let's assume that they both have Social Securities. Folks, if one of you passes away, you don't have 2 Social Securities anymore. And so you need to map out what that means to your retirement plan and make sure you're ready for the result of that. Now, some of the other things to think about is your envisioned retirement age, your income needs, how much you intend to work in retirement, your income tax liability, your spouse's retirement plans. So this is a workbook that we have that goes through a lot of different things to think about and ask yourself as you try to make this decision on Social Security. Now, lastly, this whole idea of a tax planning strategy. I'm going to drop down here into a chapter called Tax Planning, or called Taxes and Required Minimum Distributions. Folks, if you've watched some of our other videos, you know that required minimum distributions are going to occur, and you may be experiencing those right now, or maybe it's at 73 or 75, and that depends on your age. You need to know what that's going to mean for you, because that is actually at the start of some good solid tax planning. You need to know approximately how much might your RMD be and at what age. And that's something that can be mapped out. But I want to give you this basic idea here of this is just one strategy, something to think about. Imagine you have 3 different buckets of money. You have a tax deferred bucket, as stated on this far left side. And in the tax deferred bucket, that's going to be most people's biggest asset. That's going to be your IRA, your 401k, your 403b, maybe a 457. Well, when money comes out of that bucket, it is fully taxable. And so we need to understand how that works. When money comes out, fully taxable. Well, when we go to the second bucket, this middle bucket, this is what we call a taxable bucket. This is probably going to be an account owned by your trust or maybe owned individually, but ultimately only the growth is taxable on this account, okay? Now, or maybe some dividend income that comes off of the holdings. And then lastly, some of you may have a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA. Well, the growth on this is non-taxable, and if done correctly, the money coming out is tax-free. So I want you to think about your income plan in this next phase of life. If done properly, I want you to think about these 3 buckets as spigots, where you can turn on a spigot or turn off a spigot depending on the situation you are in on a year-by-year basis. Well, this is just the start of some really good tax planning. Now remember though, folks, depending on your situation, your required minimum distribution on this far left bucket, you can't stop once you hit a certain age, whatever the RMD age is for you. And so you need to take that into consideration. So I want you to really think about, where am I taking my money from, which account, and why? Because it could end up putting a ton more money in your overall accounts over the life of your retirement. And now a couple other things to think about from a tax planning standpoint. If you are charitably minded at all, and if you give to charities on an annual basis, at age 70 and a half, you can use this far left bucket to give to a qualified charity. Make sure you follow the rules, but it's fairly simple, and you can give money from this bucket that was tax deductible going in, has been tax deferred all these years, and it can actually come out tax-free if on the amount that goes to a qualified charity with certain limitations. Another thing you could do is, let's say you're not 70 and a half, but you are charitable and you give to charities on an annual basis. Well, there might be some positions inside of this taxable bucket that have quite a bit of gain in them, that if you sold, you'd be taxed on the full gain. Well, instead of selling it, consider using that position to give to that charity. Because then on that gain inside that position, it's possible no one pays taxes on the gain if that position goes directly to a charity. Well, these are just some of the many things that you can be thinking about as you map out your tax planning strategy. Folks, I hope this video was beneficial. If it is, please share with your friends, your family. Please subscribe to our channel or share it. And lastly, folks, if you are sitting there and you're thinking, man, I really want a copy of this workbook that Tony's been going through, in the description below, there is a contact us section. And what you can do is, when you provide your name and email, just in the notes, say, please send me a copy of your Retire Ready workbook, and my team can get that out to you. Until the next video.